Please join me in welcoming Maya Hari, CEO of Terrascope, and Talal Hasan, founder and CEO of 4401. Hello.
Hi.
I want to kick this off sort of similar to what we did with Theon. I would like each of you to just give me a little bit about what your companies do and sort of the achievements and the backers that you've had along the way to get you to what you are today. Talal, we can start with you.
Great. Thank you for having us here. My name's Talal. I'm the founder of 4401. And what we do is we eliminate carbon dioxide. How we do that is we convert it into rock. So we have this resource on this planet called peridotite. It's an ultramafic rock. Typically sits about 40 kilometers in the subsurface, just above the Earth's crust. And this rock gets pushed up to the surface in certain parts of this world. We have it in Europe, we have it in the Americas, in Japan, Australia, South Africa, and one of the largest deposits comes up here in Oman and the UAE. So what we do is this rock is very reactive with carbon dioxide. So as soon as it comes in contact with CO2, it mineralizes the CO2. This is a natural reaction converting the CO2 into carbonate minerals. And we take this natural reaction and we speed it up with our technology by about 100,000 times. And the way we do that is we drill into the rock and we inject CO2 mixed in a fluid into the rock, and we speed it up in the subsurface so that the CO2 is eliminated permanently forever. So we have just announced today that we've started injecting in a project in Fujairah here in the UAE. So that announcement came out today. I think it's the first time I'm talking about it. Thank you. And on that project, we've partnered with ADNOC and Masdar. So the green electrons are provided by Masdar. So on the site, we have solar plus battery. We should maybe have a conversation later. And then we also have a carbon capture unit on the site. So we're pulling CO2 directly out of the air, and we then inject and convert into rock, all decentralized on one site in Fujairah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about what you do, but Maya, I would like to come to you and tell us a bit more about Terrascope.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm the CEO for Terrascope. Terrascope is essentially a software as a service company. We're very focused on using the power of machine learning to be able to help large enterprises around the world go through their decarbonization journey end to end. What we mean by that is measuring emissions, both at the company level, but also at the level of products that or services a company might produce. But much more importantly, to take that measurement and go to the so what of it, which is how to actually decarbonize from there. What are the big hotspots? How do you think about reducing that? What are the technologies that might actually help reduce that? How to sequence that journey through net zero, and ultimately be this guide to large enterprises in this multi-year, maybe multi-decade journey that they have to go through in going to net zero. We believe that the decarbonization journey is never general. It's very specific. It's specific to sectors, and it's specific to companies and their supply chains. So we actually take the approach of using the technology to go deep into sector by sector kind of emissions. If I step back, we often, as an industry, talk about energy transition. Yeah. It's a very important part of kind of the decarbonization journey. But actually, there are three journeys that we see the world having to go through. There's the energy transition, there's the land transition, and then there is the material sciences transition. And in a way, we help a lot of sectors in the food, ag, retail, consumer product goods, very focused around the land transition to be able to go through that net zero journey. We're a software company, and we very much think about kind of bringing that layer of precision and data science to pointing to the bridge to clean tech, right? You might argue that software is not necessarily clean tech, but actually software can bring the data, and I think you talked about data and the importance of that, but that data layer to enable the right investments and the right directionality to clean tech. So we see ourselves as a bridge. It's not the story of what Terrascope does today, but we think that over the years, that's the purpose and the role we have to play in bridging between what the data says to actually where the decarbonization technologies will lead to.
Absolutely, and coming to your point, we have two very different companies on the same panel talking about one specific topic, so there's definitely a bridge to be connected here. But I do want to focus on scaling up, what that looks like for you. How easy is it to access new funds? Whether public-private partnerships are facilitated. There's another visual that I'd like to point out here, which is Asia still leads investments in the clean energy sector, largely led by China, naturally, but the Middle East is stepping up its effort. Ahmed, you just mentioned the $30 billion that the UAE is committing. So sort of also what can the Middle East do more of to help back you up?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example of our company, but really more commentary widely. Our company is a unique startup that's backed by a corporate. So we're actually a young startup, but we're a corporate venture. And I think there's incredible benefits to being this form of company because we were born out of a very validated need and a use case by the corporate backer. For us, in our case, is Olam is a Fortune 500 agri-commodities company that knows all the problems that they're going through in their need for decarbonization and net zero. And therefore, in a way, we have a very validated use case that we started building the company around. But if I step back and talk more generally about kind of investments in this space, one of the observations we have is that the conversation is less about do you need concessionary capital versus non-concessionary capital. The actual discussion should be around how do you bring capital providers who have traditionally not invested together in a certain stage of a company, but how do you actually get them to evolve their investment philosophies to try non-traditional things? Why do I say that? Technically we're a software company, really, but actually you might actually look at this space as, traditional VCs may not necessarily know how to think about clean tech in the same models, in the same time frame of their fund life as they have for non-climate companies. And what we find is that you need corporates, you need private equity, and you need VCs to all maybe think about coming together and investing at different times and bringing value. So that's where I see things being different. Geographically, I think there's really interesting opportunity for capital from this region to kind of take a wider view as they are already, but also to be able to bring the demand and the supply and the capital and the demand together in one place. I see this also for Japanese capital. So it'll be interesting to see the future world have different leading pools of capital than before.
Absolutely. And Talal, I come to you. How would the scaling up look like to you, ease of funding and public-private partnerships?
What Maya said really resonated with me. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I'll give an example of that. So when you look at our process, what we do with our technology, it's basically oil and gas, but in reverse. So rather than pulling hydrocarbons out of the ground, we're putting carbon back in. So that means we need to rely on the same supply chains, the same talent, the same partnerships, the same infrastructure, the same equipment. And this is absolutely ideal for partnerships within those sectors. And we learned this on our project here in the UAE, working with ADNOC. And one of the examples I like to give was we needed wellheads on the injection wells. And we went out into the market and we got given a timeline of about 6 months to deliver these. We call up ADNOC. They say, look, come take 2 out of our warehouse, no problem. So we actually ended up building this project in 9 months from the time of breaking ground to the time of injection. And there's no way we could have done that in that speed. It would have taken twice as long, if not more, if we had done it by ourselves without having these partnerships in place.
And I'm sure the Earthshot Prize also is a helpful boost.
Absolutely. So we were, for those of you who aren't aware, the Earthshot Prize, we were the winners last year of the Fix Our Climate category. And it's been really powerful. Apart from the capital, the prize that we won, which was £1 million, which has been helpful. They also help us with communications, and that's how we met, and that's how we're here on this panel today. But also with the partnerships. It's been really powerful for us, and I honestly believe we wouldn't have had a project up and running here in the UAE in time for COP28 had it not been for the Earthshot Prize.
I can imagine. So you also see the Middle East, all of your partnerships are here. They're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely, yes.
That's great. Maya, I come back to you, and I cover public markets, and I can confidently say that AI was the biggest, if not the biggest theme this year. AI, NVIDIA, ChatGPT, you know how it was like. But really, it actually does impact what you do as well, and we had some really good discussions about its use cases in the clean tech space. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the power of AI really is, in my mind, it's speed. It's being able to automate things from a computational perspective or from a comprehension perspective that in a way would have taken a ton more humans than the technology kind of now offers, right? And this is very exciting because we're also on a clock to be able to solve climate change kind of solutions. So this has been really good. In our own company, a lot of what we do is we actually apply machine learning to sorting through a ton of data. Just like the investment side for decarbonization of a corporate, the very first step to decarbonization, actually nothing to do with decarbonization, it's a data journey. It's being able to identify and collate a lot of data inside the company and from your supply chain that you've never collated before for any other purpose. So you don't have it sitting in a store that you can apply. And so in a way, our very first step in our product offering, it ends up being taking unstructured data and converting it into structured data, right? And we see this repeatedly in every company, and that's the very first step. So that was our very first kind of offering around machine learning and AI. Then you sort of realize that nobody's data is perfect. You go through a journey of trying to get more data, but there's always data gaps. And what we're finding is that generative AI is very helpful in being able to fill data gaps with estimations based on benchmarks, based on kind of wider world wisdom, right? And it's relatively easy to do. So it's been, for us, a massive unlock in being able to take solutions to market quicker, to bring efficacy and accuracy of solutions to a much higher level. But I sort of encourage us to not think so technically sometimes about AI. We also use AI in the most basic ways. It's productivity tool. Our legal team ends up using AI to do a lot of the grunt work around legal. There's amazing legal tech now available in terms of tools. Our sales team records every sales call with permission from our customers and is able to immediately have notes that are transcribed. This is all power of commoditizing AI in really great ways, right? So great for productivity just on day-to-day basis, but also great for unlocking clean tech solutions.
It's amazing. And Talal, I want to sort of maybe just look at it a bit more generally and talk about carbon capture and storage solutions. First of all, what is its potential? And second of all, is it a one-size-fits-all, or do you think that it's sort of all those different sorts of solutions coming together to achieve that one greater goal?
So we typically follow what the IPCC have set out, and what they've said is by 2030 we need to be removing a gigaton of CO2 a year. And just to give all of you an idea of what a gigaton is, that's equivalent to global emissions from air travel alone. So that CO2 has to be removed. We know it has to be removed. We come in and we offer a solution which is permanent and produces a carbon credit, which is what we call the gold standard. Mm-hmm. It's something which is certain. People know they can buy it, and there's absolute certainty that that CO2 cannot be re-released back into the atmosphere. For us, the bit where it gets interesting is where the CO2 comes from. And mm-hmm. I think this is probably more pointed towards your question. So at the moment, we are using direct air capture on the site here. And direct air capture is a great technology. There's a lot of companies out there doing it. However, it's still nascent, and we expect that technology to grow, as with any technology, over the coming years. So we then have to look at what are the hard-to-abate emissions that we can immediately kind of input into our system. And then we come across things like steel, cement, where today, even here in the UAE, they're already capturing some of those emissions to try make sure these materials that we use as human beings on a daily basis, which are hard to swap out, are decarbonized. And then I was just having a conversation with someone prior to this about biogenic CO2. Mm-hmm. And that's also quite exciting for us, and that's something which we see can grow in the region quite well. So for us, the source of the CO2, we are CO2 agnostic as long as it's from a hard-to-abate emission. And for us, the CO2 is quite important to make sure that we truly are decarbonizing and we truly are having a positive impact on the planet for when we convert that CO2 into rock.
Excellent. And I want to ask both of you about the risks and the challenges in both your fields. But this is, towards the end of the panel, so I want to make it positive and ask you also how you're overcoming that, Maya.
I think and you're talking about risk in general of technology and climate, right? I think the biggest risk, and this is a challenge in our day-to-day life. Every answer in climate tech points to, if you don't do the right thing, oh my God, it's doom and gloom, right? And so it can be quite depressing if you don't keep that positive outlook working in climate tech. But I think the risk is pointing in the wrong direction and going down a path that is a rabbit hole that might not necessarily be the biggest lever of decarbonization. That's often something we talk about inside the company. So while we use AI, we're thinking about what are the biggest decarb levers. We always remind ourselves, go back up and think about what is material. If it is a company and its supply chain, what is material? Rather than solving everything all at once, which is virtually impossible, how do we take the biggest material hotspots that contribute to carbon GHG emissions, and how do you decarbonize that? If you could take just that and decarbonize that, that's probably the biggest impact we can have. So that prioritization around hotspots and keeping materiality in mind is always a constant reminder we give ourselves before we go down many rabbit holes that we can go down every day. So that's how we mitigate risk in our world. We're swarmed with data all the time, but we always remind ourselves, what's the biggest problem to solve?
I see. Talal, what about you?
I guess from our side, the risk would probably be, when we first started this journey, it was a bit of a chicken-egg situation where people weren't capturing emissions or weren't doing direct air capture because they didn't know what to do with the CO2. And now we've come in and we've come up with a solution that can have a home, a safe and permanent home for that CO2. And now we need to catalyze people to capture CO2. And so for us, that has to rely on incentives or, as we say, either stick or a carrot. And we've seen this really well. The US has the IRA, which is more of a carrot, so it's tax incentives to incentivize people to put CO2 away. The EU have gone with the stick approach, where they've said, right, look, if you want to import anything into the EU, you're going to be taxed on the carbon footprint. So for us, either one of these, or even better, both, could really help catalyze and supercharge carbon removal for us here in the region. So that's something which we would like to see, and it's something which would really de-risk what we're doing.
Excellent. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for our briefing today. Thank you so much for our panelists for your time and your perspective. Thank you to Mubadala Investment Company for making the session possible, and thank you all for being a great audience. The programming at Bloomberg at COP28 continues, kicks off again at 2 p.m. for main stage events, so make sure you head down the elevator to the ground floor and catch some of that. Thank you so much.